Welcome back, everyone. Oz here, and today I've got a compilation for you all of Let's Not Meet. This one even includes some old ones from 2019. And don't forget this channel is partnered with Gamersubs. Use code Oz at checkout. Every purchase made using code Oz checkout directly supports the channel. This one's brought to us by DarkMoon9090. Creepy acts of kindness or possible stalker. So first of all, let me start by saying that I'm dyslexic, so if my spelling or grammar is off, I apologize. I'm 25, female, from England. So I've never actually met this person, so I hope this can actually go on this Reddit form. If it can't, please let me know. This started about 5 months ago, and first of all, was quite a pleasant interaction, but it slowly got worse and more creepy. So it all started about November or October. I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park a street away from my house, so I have a short walk to my house. My house is on a main road with one drive and my parents park on the drive. I asked my mother if it was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She refused it was her, and my father also said it wasn't him. So I thought it was just a kind soul or a thoughtful person. After all, where I park has a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continues for the months onward. It has only recently stopped since parking away from that side street. I asked a couple older people on the street and they said it wasn't them either. At this point, I really just wanted to say thank you. So I continued going to work and didn't notice anything else until the winter weather got worse. December 2023 was when the weirdness continued. The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasions. Since I set off from work at 7 a.m., it can be frosty at the time and I would need to de-ice my car. About mid-December, I remember running late for work and it was 7:15 a.m. and I still had not de-iced my car. So I was doing a careful rush to my car as it was very cold and icy, only to get there and see it had been de-iced for me. I was so confused but a little happy, but also shaken. It was a strange feeling. Again, I asked my parents and anyone I saw on the side street. It wasn't any of them. My mom laughed and said, "You might have a secret admirer." Well, it's like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few more times on very icy days. From January onwards is when it got strange, to the point I started parking elsewhere, as mentioned above. About the end of January, start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as homemade food left on top of my car. Don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing these away once I got to work, but I found the situation was getting beyond strange. Around the same time the first letter or note was left, it was written in what I would only describe as doctor handwriting. It was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, "the princess I deserve to be treated like." I brought this home and showed my parents, and they didn't like this at all. My dad said he was going to start parking on the street and I can park on the drive for a while. I said that would be a good idea. However, if this person was looking for my car, then they would know which house was mine. My dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and may actually know where I live. He stated the main thing was me walking home from my car to the house at 8:15 p.m. I work 12-hour shifts. He stated that he would sort the situation out if anything had happened. I questioned possibly going to the police, and he stated they would laugh at us without any proof. He was right. We didn't have anything. I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. Now it's April. I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street still close to my house. Nothing has happened since February, and I hope it doesn't, as it was starting to get worse. Do I have a stalker or just someone trying to fuck with me? I'll try to answer whatever questions you have when I can. Too long not read. Creepy acts of kindness have been happening to me, and it might be the start of a stalker. OP also has posted an update comment below. Edit from OP. I just realized I didn't mention the other note was found. It didn't stand out as much as the first one I mentioned. And I started to move my car after the second one was found. It's basically just saying, "You're welcome." Again, in a doctor sort of handwriting. First and foremost, I just want to step it. This is definitely entering stalker territory. I'm not a fan of someone touching my car, so I would personally be really upset, but I can see that this started with good intentions paving the road to hell. Guys, don't do this. What probably started as a kind gesture here and there has very quickly escalated into entitlement, especially with that "you're welcome" note. They definitely had further intentions following their actions with that note, and that is really uncomfortable. Personally, I'm of the stance of don't touch my car, but in this case, the guy was originally doing something which seemed to be appreciated from OP. The best way to do this is to not start leaving home-cooked meals and notes on top of the vehicle, especially because a home-cooked meal being left in the car could scratch it. But That being said, this is definitely a stalker forming from their original good intentions, and that is really uncomfortable. So yes, Dark Moon 9090, I hope you don't meet this person. Especially with that "you're welcome" note being left. That's a huge yikes. Pale Jello 4141, stalker at the group home. Back in 2018, I was 17 around the time. Living in foster care, the group home was situated on a busy street. Despite living in the city, we had a backyard, basketball court, picnic table, and at the very back, some grass. The whole backyard was surrounded by 2-meter-tall chain-link fences. There were houses to the right and left of ours. At the very back of the yard, on the other side of the fence, there was a public walking/biking path that stretched at least a dozen kilometers. This path would take you through this huge park along the water, to the beach, etc. It is a very popular area for people to visit. I was a regular cannabis smoker, although I was always very well put together for a teenager. The group home workers agreed to turn a blind eye on me as long as I didn't make it obvious. So, on weekend mornings, I'd go for a walk to the park behind the house, I'd roll up on the park bench and smoke. One day, everything changed. It was a weekend morning as usual at 7 a.m. I made my way to my favorite park bench. I'm sitting there with my joint in my hands. It was quite windy, and it kept lighting out. Facing the water, about 100 meters of field between the water and I noticed a man stomping through the field, heading straight for me. He didn't seem like he was on a leisurely walk at all. I remember thinking to myself, 1, why is he not using the paved path? 2, why does it seem like he's walking straight towards me? And 3, what is he holding? 4, is anybody else around? Panic ensued. He was holding something chunky in one of his hands. I looked around for someone, noticed an elderly woman walking from the direction of the group home. She was about 20 meters away from me. I sped walk towards the woman. By the time I got to where the man had made it to the bench I was sitting on, the woman kept walking towards the bench, and I, the opposite direction. For a moment, I looked back to make sure the man wasn't following me, or worse. I see the man lay his brick down on a pile of rocks behind the bench. The woman stopped walking. I'm guessing she had processed something peculiar. Thankfully, the man kept moving straight towards the boulevard, and not to be seen in the park. The woman then turns around and she looks at me with this shocked stare in her eyes. I remember feeling reassured. We both continued on with our days without saying a single word. The same day, around 9 p.m., people aren't allowed to smoke within 10 meters of an entry to an establishment, and there was only one light in the backyard. It was above the entry to the establishment, so this girl in my group home goes out for a smoke in the backyard. No lights. Like 3 minutes later, she's banging on the door yelling. I let her in. She's freaking out. We're trying to get answers out of her, then she explains. There was a man. He stood there on the path. She watched and stared, taking pulls of her cigarette. The man starts to walk towards her, and then starts climbing the fence. That's when I shared my story from that same morning. To be honest, I thought I was being paranoid at first, but when someone tried to hop the fence, I believe it was the same man. The workers on shift that night called the police, and the police started patrolling the path at night. The group home added some garden light in the back, and I hope this piece of shit never lays hands on anyone. This is indeed a Let's Not Meet, because there is no way of knowing what the ending intentions were, because this could have been bad. And I also can't help but to feel the group home may have been a target because there's not as much of a support system put in place because they're in foster care. So that makes it even more a bit of a yikes situation in general. This one's brought to us by Binch Lauren. Man waited for me after my friend's shift. I, 23 female, was staying with my friend who is also 23 female for a couple of weeks in the town I grew up in. She works at a restaurant. Without giving away too many details about the location, it's a plaza with a river nearby, a movie theater, restaurants, and some boutiques. We entered through the parking garage, which has 3 stories, both elevators and stairs. This is important. She had a 6-hour shift, so I decided to do some shopping, listen to music, and walk around before eating at the restaurant my friend works at. I was sitting at the bar on the corner alone, listening to music. A bigger man approached me. He had a security guard beanie on that was incredibly dirty and tattered up. He was muttering, and his eyes were barely open. What I got from his muttering was, is anyone sitting? But keep in mind, it was incredibly muttered. I'm just guessing what he was trying to say. All of this was said while he was switching back and forth between looking into my eyes and staring at my chest. I told him multiple times I couldn't understand what he said. After a bit of a back and forth, I put my headphones back around my neck and he left me alone. I told my friend about what happened immediately. I tried to shake it off, hoping it was an isolated incident. If this is where the story ended, I wouldn't be writing this, unfortunately. About an hour later or so, I see someone approach the bar to my left out of the corner of my eye, and I felt their eyes on me. I didn't look, but somehow I knew it was him. My heart started beating really fast. I texted my friend and told her I felt really sketched out. I wanted to believe that I was misreading things and was just letting my anxiety get the best of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. 30 minutes or so later, she gets off. As we walk towards the parking garage stairs to get to our car, I saw him sitting on a bench, waiting for me. The benches aren't super close to the elevators. They're closer to the restaurant, if anything. The second I spotted him, my blood ran cold. He saw us walking towards the stairs to the parking garage and started running towards us. I was face to face with him by the time we got to the top of the stairs. We booked it back to the restaurant and used the employee elevator to get to our car, and an employee escorted us to the car as well. The employee told us there are a lot of cases of homeless people who walk around the restaurant, so I presume he was homeless and just walking in and out of restaurants until he saw me. I'm incredibly thankful I trusted my gut and I saw him. I don't know what would have happened to us if I didn't see him at first, but I don't want to find out. To this stranger, let's not meet. Too long didn't read. A man attempted to approach me multiple times while I was at the bar alone. He waited for me on a bench and chased me to the parking garage when he saw me walk out of the bar. I'm on mobile, so I apologize if the formatting is shit. Please ignore my typo in the title. Additional edit. 6 hours isn't that long. That's what you're focused on? I can only imagine that edit was necessary because people were, well, in the comments of this thread being kind of assholes. Yeah, it's definitely not what you should be focused on here. I would say even if this guy was just a really awkward flirt and had no malicious intentions, that OP had every right to, get the hell out of there. Especially because she has no way of knowing what the intentions are. Guys, if you see someone in a public space and they look busy, don't interject yourself into their day just for a chance of possibly getting laid. That's not how that works. This one's brought to us by Sip of Sunshine. I was someone else's Let's Not Meet. This was years ago, but I still tell this story to my friends anytime I get the chance. I was the baddie in someone's Let's Not Meet. When I was in high school, I entered a relationship with a very close friend named Ivory. After Ivory and I broke up, we stayed good friends. And when Ivory's birthday came around, she asked me to come to the birthday party she was having. The first leg of the evening was at a restaurant I'd never been to a few towns over. Afterward, we would all return to a mutual friend's house for beverages and relaxation. One of Ivory's friends had volunteered to drive us out to the restaurant, but I'd heard plenty of stories about her terrible driving. As a result, I opted to chauffeur myself in my luxurious minivan. Yes, I drove a minivan in high school. Ivory's friend told me 7 p.m., so at 7 p.m., my black ace... am I allowed to say that? My complexion is moonburn complexion. I gotta be careful in the moonlight, so I think I'm like the least qualified person to ever utter that statement in this planet. Anyways, so at 7 p.m., I rolled into the parking lot. I called Ivory to let her know that I had arrived, but they were just leaving. I overheard Ivory tell her friend, if you tell Sip of Sunshine 7, he's there at 7. This all meant I had about a half hour of boredom before I'd have company. Being the introvert I am, I decided not to go inside and wait like a normal person. Instead, I decided to listen to whatever angsty music I was into at the time, probably Heartbeat by Childish Gambino. Moreover, I also didn't park right near the restaurant. The restaurant was located in a plaza, a strip with several other stores along either side. For some reason, I thought it'd be weird for patrons to see me just sitting there like some waiting weirdo. Instead, I parked at the far end of the plaza by a supermarket. I could still see the restaurant, and there were fewer cars on this side of the parking lot. 5 minutes go by, I'm rapidly switching through songs. 10 minutes go by, I'm bored like a piece of pine in a woodshop class. Out of the abyssal silence of boredom, I felt the hum of a text come through. Ivory had texted me, "Thank God." A brief reprieve from this boredom. As I'm composing a response, I get this weird feeling. You know that feeling like someone is watching you, like you can almost hear their eyes? I felt something unnerving, so I looked up from the glow of my phone into the darkness before me. What I saw was a family of 4. There was a woman, her husband, and their 2 children. All 4 were looking at me intensely. The woman was standing in front of her 2 children with her hands outstretched, as though to shield them from a proleptic and palpable existential danger. The look in her eyes was of sheer horror, like a waiter had just asked her, "Is Pepsi okay?" I have never seen such utter panic so visible in someone's face. and I once had to physically intervene to prevent an armed assailant from attacking someone. The woman slowly creeped forward, family inching behind her. She began moving towards the driver's side closer to me with each step, and with each step, her terror rising. At this point, I'm beginning to panic because I have no clue why this woman and her family are snarling at me so aggressively. Did they mistake me for a Ajit Pai? Without warning, the husband says something I could not hear through the glass. He extends his arm and points to my left. His wife, children, and I all simultaneously follow his hand. He was pointing 5 spots to the left of my car where an almost identical one sat. The mother threw her head back in a single burst of laughter as she unlocked her car. This family left the grocery store to find a black teen dressed in all black sitting in their car. He then proceeded to maintain eye contact for what felt like an eternity. My perplexed expression likely appeared as a more sinister one, especially in the crepuscular light. I'm just glad they realized where their car was before anyone got hurt or the police got called. So, family who thought I was in their car at night, I promise we totally can meet. I'm actually a really nice guy who doesn't steal cars. Too long didn't read, family thought I was stealing their car because I was sitting in my car to pass the time. Pretty sure the panic literally shaved years off of that poor woman's life. Edit. I just wanted to thank everyone for being so encouraging about my writing. You all inspired me to take it very serious as a hobby. I'm sure you'll see me around on some writing subreddits. You lot are truly wonderful. This was an absolute delight to read and narrate. Phenomenal job, Sip of Sunshine, and this was actually probably one of my... This might be my favorite Let's Not Meet story because it... it's just solid. I love it. This one's brought to us by Responsible Carpet 43. The bad feeling that saved my life. Hello, my name is Christoph and I'm a high school student in my first year, so I'm 16 years old. This story took place during the second week of Easter vacation in 2023 when I was 15 years old, and I want to mention that it happened at my mother's house. At the time, my mother had decided to renovate the kitchen because it was really outdated, so there was a blonde guy with blue eyes who came to start the work, which involved putting up plastic sheets in the walls and a divider in my living room, which is next to the kitchen. At the end of the day, I had to go to the dentist and pick up a dental impression, and my mother had informed the worker that we would be back in an hour and 30 minutes. However, since the appointment was just to pick up an item, we returned in only 45 minutes. On the way back, my mother suggested getting kebabs and doing a good deed by dropping off the worker at the train station. When I returned to offer him a ride to the station, I noticed he was very uneasy with a nervous smile, as if to say everything was fine. I insisted that he come with us, and he agreed. Along the way, he explained that his name is Brian. I'm changing his name for anonymity. And that he was originally from Moldova. He also mentioned that he lived alone in Paris, but had 2 children living in his home country. We arrived at the station, dropped him off, grabbed our kebabs, and went home. After finishing eating, I decided to take a bath, as I love doing that all in time. However, this time, to my dismay, the water turned from hot to cold, so I spent 2 hours in lukewarm water. Then, got out and returned to my upstairs room. Immediately, upon opening the door, I noticed that my PC was open and turned onto my lock screen wallpaper, even though I distinctly remembered closing it before going downstairs for my bath. I asked my mother if she had been in my room or touched my PC, and she said no, that she had stayed in her room watching the news. After a quick search of my room turned up nothing, I decided to finally go to sleep. But at 5 a.m., I woke up sweating and shivering intensely, which had never happened to me before. I had a feeling of danger, and that something or someone was nearby. So I grabbed a knife because, yes, it's a bit scary, but I have a passion for edged weapons, probably from manga. And I have a collection of knives, katanas, and shurikens on my bedroom wall. With the knife, I searched my room again, but found nothing. However, the feeling didn't go away. So I locked my door and messaged my mother to see if she was awake and had the same feeling. But she didn't respond. I waited for 3 hours until I heard her walking in her room. She came to see me and I explained what happened that night. She told me I was probably just being paranoid and that everything was fine. She also warned me that Brian would arrive around 10 a.m. to continue the work, and since she would be leaving for work, I would be alone with him. She assured me that I wouldn't need to go downstairs to let him in because she had told him she kept the keys in a woodshed next to the door. She then went to work, and I went back to sleep, locking my door. I woke up at 11:30 a.m., went downstairs to make food in the basement because the kitchen was under construction, and when I didn't find Brian there, I didn't think much of it. I went back upstairs and I ran into him. As soon as I saw him, that bad feeling returned, but he started talking to me. I tried to end the conversation and quickly went back to my locked room. 10 minutes later, Brian knocked on my door, asking for help carrying something. I didn't respond because I really didn't want to see him again. But he started trying to open the door and began kicking it hard, so my first instinct was to grab a knife, lock myself in my bathroom, which is in my room, and call the police. I explained in a panic what was happening, and the woman on the line said she was sending 2 cars, which would arrive in 10 minutes. While waiting, Brian managed to enter my room and began breaking down the bathroom door. I told him I had called the police, that they would arrive any minute, that I was armed with a knife, and that I wouldn't hesitate to use it. Upon hearing this, he stopped banging on the door and left. The police arrived and caught Brian as he was trying to flee. My mother immediately came home, saw me, and burst into tears, telling me she should have listened to me. A few days later, the police called to explain that Brian was wanted for kidnapping, identity theft, torture, and murder. I believe that bad feeling I had during the night was him returning and hiding outside my room in the house because he knew where the spare keys were hidden. But now he's in prison, and I hope to never see him again. I'd be very interested to get some audience input on this, what everyone's general thoughts are. I, of course, have my own, but I think for this particular one, I'd be more interested to get everyone else's vibes in the story and just kind of see what everyone's feeling on it. At the end of the day, I'm just really happy that Kristoff and everyone's alright, and this did not end with the most horrible possible outcome that could have come from this. And this goes to everyone else. I hope everyone stays safe out there and that you all have a wonderful night, evening, morning, or whatever time of day it is for you. This one's brought to us by Cool Girl Here. Stranger in Park started asking me suspicious questions about my autistic son. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic. He constantly sims with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he'll say, "Whittle wobbles," when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, 8, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter hit it off, so he came over to talk to me. My son is in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time, and he hits himself in the head, so I constantly redirect him. The man asks if my son is autistic, and I say yes. He then asks when he was diagnosed. I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asks if he's in regular classes or special needs. I don't answer him right away because I'm getting uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class. He asks what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and then tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer a special needs class, not specifically which school my son goes to. Then he asks if my son runs off a lot. I just reply sometimes. He notices the GPS tracker on my son's ankle. He asks how well that tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off. At this point, I realize that this is not a conversation I want to have. I tell him that I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore. He responds with, "I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him that not all autistic children are the same and he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter over, who was upset because she was having fun playing with a little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks why we had to go and I tell her that we have to go home and do stuff around the house. She's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because the girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks he was her stepdad, and she said that the little girl told her he was her mom's boyfriend. I'm curious now. I ask what else she said about him. She tells me that the little girl said, man's name, likes to talk to girls like your mom and it makes my mom mad. I then ask if there was anything else and she tells me the girl said she was glad she met my daughter because she's an only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me the little girl asked for her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single? It could be more sinister than that, but I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and say they are sending an officer to the park. By the time the officer got to the park, a couple hours later, they were of course gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and the little girl's first names, and what I think he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume it was his vehicle in the lot. They tell me they will call if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain that he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update. The man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend who is a sheriff's deputy in the county to the south of me. They had gotten similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video in his license plate this time. My brother's friend sent me the guy's mugshot and asked me if this was the man. It was. My brother's friend was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him, and he couldn't tell me anything other than that she was safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me yesterday. I found out his full name and looked up all his charges. He had a warrant in the state to the north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment. And now, new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have charges brought against him for that, but my story may be needed for his case. I'm not a lawyer or law enforcement, so I don't know the specifics on how or why, but maybe to show a trend of his behavior, targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think I went too far calling the police, but in this case, I am confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it went unreported. Honestly, the moment that he was asking about the ankle monitor was that was the red flag. That was the big moment, because I can understand the initial concern. Granted, him being concerned about the nephew was a bit of a red flag unless he's just a very involved uncle. But the tracking monitor and asking him how well it tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off was a bit much. Honestly, I don't know if I have the instincts to get the red flags from that kind of conversation. I honestly, I don't know. Maybe it's just a vibes thing. That actually does kind of make me really worried because I am a bit of a people pleaser and ugh. Bitter FXCC. Incident before work. This happened last year right before I switched up jobs in October. I used to work really early in the morning. I would catch a transit bus at 4:30, get to my intersection, and hopefully catch a connection bus. I don't like walking in this neighborhood for 2 reasons. 1, I was almost hit by a drunk driver while walking to work, and 2, I have a lot of body pain that makes walking distances difficult. My bus was running late, so sadly I did miss my connection and was forced to walk, so I began my 15-minute walk to my job in the dark of the morning. Now, the neighborhood is strange, one of those where you simply cross the street and you're either in the good or bad side of the neighborhood. I was in what was the newer, good side of the area. To add to this, the area is barely lit with hardly any streetlights, so it was an anxiety-inducing walk. As I am walking, I see headlights down one of the darkened streets. It catches my attention and I glance down it for a split second. Then I focus back on the path ahead of me. Suddenly, the car is peeling out of that street and does a sharp turn to pull up right next to me. In the car were 3 to 4 guys. I want to say they were in their early to mid-20s. It was hard to tell, but I immediately went on high alert. When they got beside me, they started screaming at me about how they were going to kill me and a bunch of other shit before they eventually made a U-turn on the road and peeled off in the opposite direction. My heart was racing. I was shaking. It was the second time something bad happened in that neighborhood that put me off that I couldn't wait to get a new job away from the area. While their threats were empty and probably just a bunch of dudes being jackasses, it didn't take away the fact that for a split second, I was afraid they were going to mow me down with their car or jump out and beat the shit out of me. It only added fuel to the growing PTSD fire of almost getting rammed by a drunk driver. Luckily, I got a new job within a month of the incident, but I am still nervous around traffic, and every time a car speeds by me while I'm walking on the sidewalk, I feel my heart racing because I think of that time and the drunk driver. I definitely do think that they were just trying to fuck with you and just kind of stir some stuff up and all that, but that's just a not okay thing to do, and that really sucks because being alone on a sidewalk in the dark and having a car speed up to you, windows roll down, and people yell they're gonna kill you, yeah, that's gotta suck. This one's brought to us by Gaia Anna. I woke up to a girl watching me in my sleep. My female friend came to visit me for a long weekend and I, 22 female, won't be letting her stay ever again. Backstory. We were friends for maybe 3 months before we both moved to separate states and continued our friendship virtually until now. It has been a healthy friendship with open communication. We have had our disagreements, but mostly always talked it out and moved on. They mostly revolved around her believing I don't open up enough, and for me, she does things that are inconsiderate at times, like be jealous of my long-term friends to their faces and have an odd attitude problem at times. Only has been shown maybe 3 times. She can also be a bit obsessive and get upset when I don't text her for more than a day. She's got loads of my photos saved to her phone and remembers every little thing about me and has a list of my interests. I've seen it endearing. Until now. The trip. Day 1. The first day of the trip was great. She was bubbly and brought me a gift with a sweet note of appreciation. We went clubbing and headed to bed, separately, for the first night. This is where things got weird. Remember, we slept separately. Well, I woke up and she was in my bed, but not in my bed. She was sitting upright on top of the blankets next to me with her feet straight out and her back against the headboard while looking forward. I was startled and said, "Oh," instinctively. She just looked at me. She never said she was waiting for me to wake up or maybe she was uncomfortable on the couch. Nothing. Then she left my room. I have no clue how long she was sitting there. Day 2 through 3. Day 2. In the morning, we walked to the city where she was engaged in wanting to hold my hand while we were out and about. By midday, still day 2, her attitude has shifted completely and she is near mute. She isn't conversing with me, enjoying any of the activities or even smiling anymore, at the bar, arcade, or even at home watching movies. You know how those driving games take a silly little photo for your profile pic on the leaderboard? I was blowing up a kissy face in mine. I glanced at hers and even snapped a pic without her noticing. Her head was tilted forward, looking up at the camera. She was blank-faced, with you being able to mostly see the whites of her eyes. It was like the film poster of a horror film. See Orphan 2009. Anyways, for the rest of the trip, she continued to not smile. She was cold to every service worker. She responded with one-word answers otherwise, complained about any and everything. I asked, "Are you okay?" a couple of times, and she replied, "I'm fine," avoiding eye contact every time. Car rides were silent. Dinners were silent. Day 4, the final day. I drove her to the airport at 3 a.m. I asked if she enjoyed her visit and she said it was okay. It was fine. I told her I enjoyed having her. She boarded her flight and left. I cannot figure out what caused this 180-degree shift. I paid for everything. Took her to all sorts of events she wanted to go to and even took a day off, my first sick day ever, to take her to more. I felt myself overcompensating because I felt insecure of being a terrible host or something. I've had several friends stay with me and express to me that they've enjoyed themselves so much they never want to leave. I don't believe I did anything so wrong to ruin this trip. When she arrived home, she did not contact me, but she posted photos and videos of me captioned "mine" on her social media. I haven't brought this conversation to her yet. All of my family and friends believe I narrowly avoided a Selena Yolanda Lifetime film situation and that I was potentially with someone unstable. What do you think? I think she had a crush on you and just was too socially awkward to properly communicate or convey any of that. This could be anything from infatuation to sexual attraction, but platonic friendships usually don't have these weird caveats that you described, and I think that her getting into bed with you was an attempt at perhaps progressing things and you shutting her down is why she became so quiet. Also, the posting of mine on the social media with videos and photos of you, that's a massive red flag right there. Same page, 7520. The worst substitute. This was in middle school. My teacher was absent one day, and this gym coach was substituting for him that day. I've seen him around the school before, and he's substituted for us a few times. I was sitting at my desk talking to my friend behind me and pretending to do my work, and for some reason, he decided to walk around the room to check if we were doing the assignment. So, I turned to my desk and started writing. He goes one by everyone's desk, but slows down once he reaches mine. He hovers over me, just staring down at my work. I got nervous because I didn't want him calling me out, but for some reason I felt his breath on me, heavily, which was grossing me out. He was a frail, old-looking man, so I didn't think much of it. He walked really slow and seemed harmless, but was very passive-aggressive when he spoke to us. I'd always get this weird, creepy vibe from him, but always thought it was just me. A few months go by, and the rumor of him being fired circled around the school. I was curious, so I'd ask around to know what the T was. Apparently, the same teacher that would sub for my class was fired. He was caught trying to touch the girls during practice and throughout gym periods. He touched a girl, which was soon reported by the student. And he even got caught hiding in the crack of the door watching the girls change in the locker room. He just watched them. He finally got caught while doing so, and he was soon fired and kicked out of the school. The news made it everywhere. Even on the news, it spread like wildfire. Thinking back to it now, it gives me chills to think that he'd watch girls change, and thank goodness he got caught. You never know people's intentions. Yeah, I've seen some teachers do some pretty damn questionable things that raise an eyebrow, and I wouldn't be surprised if the events as described actually did happen, because this kind of shit does in fact happen. However, I am at times hesitant to believe these kinds of stories because when I was in middle school, there was a teacher who had a very unfortunate last name that definitely did not help with the rumors being spread about him. But the rumors that he was harboring CP in his school computer got so out of control that the administrators had to look into it, and the next year, he was gone. So of course, all the students jumped to the conclusion of, oh, he got busted. Nope, turns out he didn't like the fact that his students were making up rumors about him having CP and left and is now a principal of some other school that's north of where it previously was. Gotta keep details vague on this, but yeah, that kind of shit can really suck and it breaks my heart to think about that nowadays. Middle schoolers can be vicious, man. Banana slippery sticks. Crazy lady tried calling CPS. This isn't really creepy, but it was scary for sure. No, I am not the parent of the situation, but rather the kid. This was who knows how many years ago. I was young, maybe like 7 or 8. I think 7. I was with my 2 other siblings, my little brother and my older sis. We're all 3 years apart. Anyway, we were all in the car waiting for our mom who had gone inside a Pizza Delight to pick up our food, which she had pre-ordered beforehand. This was in Bayers Lake, I think. We were only alone in there for maybe a minute, and I was tired, so I was half asleep against the window. It wasn't long before I was abruptly woken up to aggressive and loud banging on our car window. My sister, maybe 10 at the time, was sitting shotgun. I was in the back seat diagonal from her, and my little brother, probably 4, was beside me. We all immediately looked to where the sound was coming from, and we saw a 40 to 50-year-old looking lady. I don't remember much about her as it was laid out, but her hair was kind of frizzy, thin, and crazy looking. It was silvery blonde, and she had a receding hairline and was sweating profusely on her forehead. She looked a little on the heavy side and her face was practically pressed up against the glass, and she had an intense, crazy look. She held her phone up against the window, my sister's window, with the white emergency dial screen up, and yelled something at us. I can't remember what. My mom was literally walking back to the car when this happened and was like, what the fuck? So she immediately gets into the car and the woman runs around to the door and grabs it, yelling at her about how she's a terrible person for leaving her kids alone in a car and that she was gonna call CPS. Our mom explains to her that she was only gone for 5 minutes max and that she had a 10-year-old in the car with a phone. The car was locked and she could see the car from where she was in the restaurant. The lady keeps screaming at my mom though and grabs my mom's wrist. So my mother, who's in the military, immediately rips her hand off the wrist and slams the door, rolls down the window to give her the bird and books it. The woman was screaming the whole time and looked genuinely insane and terrifying. Anyways, we later dubbed her Pizza Karen around 2020 when we were reminiscing about the event and laughed about it now. But yeah, that's my story. Hope it temporarily fulfilled your boredom. To me, this sounds like someone who probably started out with good intentions but got a little lost with their motives because they probably saw kids in a car. If it was a hot day, considering the fact that she was described as sweating, maybe she was like, oh God, what if their parents are in a grocery store for a long period of time and, is just letting them bake in there? That's probably my first thought. If it was just a couple minutes and grabbing pizza, I mean, there's no problem with that as long as like the AC was on and everything was going well, but it's definitely just, ugh. The moment the mother came out, that should have been the end of that. But I think the lady in question got a little too committed to what she was currently doing and wanted to see it through. And that's probably what led to her technically committing assault and battery. This one's brought to us by Fox Mulder. I viewed the property of a man who murdered his previous tenant. When I finished uni, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room for rent on the outskirts of town I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. So we had a chat one evening, and it turned out we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it had felt like chatting to an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s, like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he'd told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I'd already decided I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a games console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother, who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view, but I would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave, but everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I was back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I had thought any more about moving in. I lied and said I found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some young professionals, which turned out to be great. Now, get this. Several months later, our town was shocked with the news that a man's body had been found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murdered suspect was his landlord, James. The same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. I can only assume that this was the Mark that supposedly had moved to London, because if it wasn't, then I have a question. Is he just targeting Marks and just trying to ice them off? Does he have a vendetta against people named Mark? Either way, definitely a close call, because who knows? Maybe Mark was on the menu. In multiple ways, apparently. Ugh. Correct Detective 927. To the girl I was best friends with in elementary school. It seems we have an introductory edit for some context. Since I messed up my age quite a bit, my family was only in that state for about 2 years in my early childhood. I was in 4th grade when this all happened. It all hit the fan in 5th grade, us moving back in the middle of the year. I guess that would make me younger than I remember to be. I guess the whole situation feeling so serious and adult that I just thought I was older when it happened. Sorry for the confusion. I guess more accurately, I'm 22 currently. I did go back and check my mom's Facebook to confirm that we were in that new state in 2012 though. Sorry for any confusion. When I was in the 3rd grade, my family and I moved out of state for my dad's job. I started at a new elementary school and made fast friends with a girl I'll call Maria. The two of us were inseparable, but her hobbies were something I wasn't used to. This was about 2012, and a big thing she loved was gore. Not just any scary movie gore, but My Little Pony gore really introduced me to a dark side of the internet for an 11-year-old girl. She kept a binder full of these gory images and often showed them to me on the bus. First red flag. Second red flag, the boyfriend. Being a literal child at the time, I didn't understand the sudden interest of dating from my peers, but Maria had a boyfriend. It was your typical elementary school relationship, giggling at just holding hands, and it was as short-lived as any elementary school relationship, with him breaking up with her without a care in the world. But she did not take this well. She gathered our little crew in the playground, me, her right-hand man. She laid out the plan. We were going to chase the boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, I guess, catch him, hold him down, and she would beat him up, I guess? We all didn't want to do this, obviously, but she zeroed in on me. I was her best friend, after all. I was supposed to do this for her. I, being the stupid 11-year-old I was, told her she was acting insane and I was going to go play with the boys. From that point on, we weren't best friends. She was my bully. She harassed me endlessly, little texts constantly popping up on my flip phone, calling me names on the bus, telling authority figures that I had started it. Eventually, this accumulated into a sit-down with the principal where we both were scolded and told to play nice. For a bit, everything was calm. Then, the art room scissors started going missing. Red flag number 3. I had been chatting with a friend on the bus when Maria had put a pair of the scissors very close to my neck. She laughed it off, and I stayed quiet, just wanting to keep some sort of peace at school. I knew she had stolen them. Never understood why I never said anything. things were quiet for a while again. But one day, a day that still haunts me, a day that has put up barriers in me that I shouldn't have had at a young age. I was taking my usual bus route, arriving early and taking a seat near the back. Maria arrives, sitting by herself on the opposite side near the front. We took off and began the ride to school. As we were nearing the elementary school, mine and Maria's eyes locked. I'll never forget that smile. She proceeded to pull a kitchen knife from her bag, one of the big ones from a knife block. She flashed to me before zipping the bag as the bus came to a stop. I remember sitting in my seat as everyone piled off the bus. I don't remember much after that. I remember freaking out in front of the school. I remember sitting in the office all day. I remember talking to men in uniforms. I remember reading something I probably shouldn't have. She was planning to hurt me and the boy who broke up with her. She was suspended for the rest of the year, and I moved before she came back, and I never saw her again. So, to the girl that I was best friends in elementary school, let's not meet again. Yeah, this checks out, especially with the My Little Pony gore. That's an actual thing that was happening. It still is actually happening. I remember when growing up, my friend's little sister stumbled upon FNAF when she was 8 years old and started drawing a bunch of pictures of, FNAF-related stuff. And of course, her parents seeing her drawing scary metal monster animals and dead children definitely caused a lot of red flags to be raised and ask for potential psychiatric help, because you don't expect your child to be drawing that kind of stuff. You definitely got to be careful about giving children unrestricted access to the internet, because they could definitely stumble upon some stuff that could really do some serious psychological damage to them long term. Many patient 2894. Were my friend and I almost taken by a tourist guide in Greece? Now, this happened in summer of 2015 to me, 30 female, and my friend, 30 female. Let's call her Claire. We were both 21 and backpacking together. We still talk about this story, and we wonder if we were actually in any real danger. I told her I was going to post this here and get some opinions. When we got to the Greece portion of the trip, we started in Athens and then took the ferries to the other islands. The first island we visited was Crete, and the only luggage we had was one large backpack each and one shoulder bag each. We got off the very long, about 10 hours, ferry ride to Crete just when the sun was starting to go down. It wasn't dark at all yet, but the sky was becoming pale pink and blue. When we disembarked and found ourselves in the port, we looked like classic tourists. Maps stretched out in front of us, spinning around, pointing here, pointing there, looking confused, trying to orientate ourselves so that we could walk the half-hour walk to our hostel. There are several people standing offering us taxis, as we experienced every time we arrived to a new island. Men or women would approach us saying they could drive us to where we needed to be, etc. We actually took someone up on it once and it worked out well, and we ended up using them for the rest of our stay on the island. We couldn't figure out how to get to our hostel, even with our maps and transit information. Heraklion was bigger than most of the other island towns, and we were nervous that it was going to be dark soon and we didn't want to get lost. Then, right when we were looking at each other, deciding that maybe we'd bite the bullet and take a taxi, a man approached us. He was medium height, medium build, looked to be in his mid-30s, and was very handsome. Great smile, long, dark hair, great teeth, clean cut, nice linen outfit. He was holding a weird velvet pouch thing, almost looked like the velvet bag that the Scrabble letters come in. He looked super friendly and greeted us, told us that he had a taxi company and could take us into town, and we agreed. He told us they were parked just around the corner from the port, a couple of blocks away, because he didn't want to use the port parking or spend a long time getting out of the congested, pedestrian-heavy part near the docks. He told us to follow him. It was just a 5-minute walk up the street and around the bend. Claire and I looked at each other and agreed. I think we both thought he was really handsome. I don't really remember why we were so easily persuaded. I think we were also just exhausted from a long day of travel, so we leave the port with him and start walking on the road. This is where it starts to get weird. He told us he was a tourist guide, that he had a tourism company, and that's why he had this car. We thought before he said he had a taxi company, but whatever, maybe it was the same thing. We then asked where he was from, and he said Madrid. Now, I speak fluent Spanish, as I actually lived in Madrid for a little bit as a teenager, and I rejoiced at the opportunity to practice, and I started speaking to him in Spanish. He looked at me completely confused and then doubled back to say, "Oh, actually, I don't speak Spanish. I'm actually Hungarian, but my parents live in Madrid," or something very confusing and different than what he had just said. We shrugged it off, but it was the first time Claire and I caught each other's eye behind his back and gave each other looks. We'd been walking for about 5 minutes now, with no indication of where he planned on taking us or where his taxi was. This seemed weird to us. A taxi company that you had to walk to? When Claire was telling him we were in a university, he was smiling and friendly and charming and saying that he was also a student and lived in Barcelona and was studying there to become a lawyer. Then I asked him, wait, don't you have a tourism company here? And he stopped. His face fell, and he looked like he'd just been busted. He then changed his story around to include all things, and I forgot what he came up with. Something about how he was a part-time student, but also had a tourism company in Greece to pay for his school. It made no sense, and at that point, Claire and I were trying to catch him out. But it was okay. We were on a busy road, a wide avenue with lots of cars, a main street in the city, and it was still light enough. He asked us where our hostel was, aka where'd he be driving to. We said, "Where's your car?" And he said, "Oh, it's just up here," indicating a turn around the block which would lead us off into a side street that was lined with 10 feet tall hedges. Again, he asked us where our hostel was, and, this was stupid of me, I stopped and took my phone out of my purse, with the three of us leaning in to look at the address and where it was on the map that I had screenshotted. Claire noticed that I was gripping my phone so hard that my fingers were white, because I didn't want him to snatch it out of my hands. I will never forget what happened next. He was nodding as he was looking at the map, and then just said, "Okay, my car is just another 5 or 10 minute walk around this corner." And Claire and I looked at each other. What happened next occurred over the span of about 3 seconds. We have both spoken about this feeling we felt in that second, like we both went ice cold from our crowns to our toes. It was a real moment of panic. My first instinct was to grip my purse immediately, which I did, and he noticed because his eyes immediately flickered down to it. And then, Claire and I looked again at each other, and without even needing to communicate, we both gave the other a nod of the head, as if to say, "Okay, go." We both ran directly into the road, cars honked, and we stopped traffic, and in fact, almost caused a car to bonk into another because everyone screeched to a stop. After we ran across the avenue and got to a little strip of grass in the middle of that divided road, we looked back and he was absolutely nowhere to be seen. Nowhere. We looked at the direction we'd come, at the way he was going, and he was nowhere. The only place he could have gone was into the bushes. We also were able to see around the corner he wanted us to turn with him, and the whole way down that side street, there were no cars parked. We could see about a 15-minute walk down the street, and not a single vehicle was anywhere in our field of vision. If anyone has any ideas on what this might have been, Claire and I would love to know. So, creepy tourist guy from where the fuck ever, I hope we never meet again. In any circumstance, this is incredibly sketchy. Either he was planning to rob you guys and taking you into a secluded area where, he could easily get away, assuming that he was probably faster, stronger, able to easily overpower and take some nice goodies from some tourists. Doesn't seem likely though, as it sounds like you guys were just wearing backpacks and bags, so I don't know if you guys would be a good mark. With all the details described, it definitely does sound like some kind of ploy that had nefarious intentions, especially with his backstory changing and him being caught off guard with the Spanish. I would say that in every circumstance, running was 100% the correct choice. It wasn't my cat. Hello, my name is Alex, and here's my story. At the time, I was in my old bedroom, which was basically one of the smallest rooms in the house. I'm now in a new bedroom. This one is way more spacious. My bedroom was about a 5 meter by 5 meter, and it could only fit a bed, 2 nightstands, and a dresser with a mirror screwed on top. It was in the basement. Now, most of you guys probably think a basement is dark, creepy, and eerie, but mine was not. My parents made sure to make this as full of life as possible. They painted the walls, installed the gaming room, which I use often, and basically making it really cool if someone in our family wanted to have a party there. Now, the room that I had, I think it was actually fair that I had that one room, because before we moved houses, both of my brothers had to sleep in a tiny bedroom, about 5 square feet large. Basically, the worst, and I had the biggest room in the whole house. So at the time, we had 3 cats. One died later on, after what I had lived, but that's not really relevant to the story. One of the 3 was my favorite. I loved her and took care of her, and she made sure I wasn't depressed. Sometimes we would just let her go outside during the night, and I would let her go in sometimes when she scratched on my window. She still does it to this day. I was an insomniac, and I never slept well. My parents knew about it, so they decided to get some melatonin pills to help me sleep. My window was on top of the bedroom's wall, which meant that my cat didn't need to hop onto any ledge or border to scratch with her paws on it from the outside, letting me know that she wanted to get in. It was a night that I decided to take some melatonin pills, which worked fantastically when I couldn't sleep, and so I was literally about to sleep, like I was on the edge of dreaming, and I heard my cat scratch, or so I thought. I sighed and got up to move my curtains out of the way so I could let her in, but when I opened my window, I heard something move, or step on rocks that were around my window. At that time, I was too sleepy to realize that it wasn't a cat's footsteps that I heard, but a human's. So, as a normal person, I yelled my cat's name and put my hand out of the window to tap on the ground, as such to let my cat know that she could come to get in. That was my mistake. In no time, I heard footsteps coming straight to the window. I felt a man's hand grab my arm and start to pull me out of my window. I started screaming for someone to come and help me, but nobody came. I felt the adrenaline instantly rush to my body and quickly grabbed a sharp object. I believe it was a dirty knife covered in old food, and stabbed the guy's hand. Blood dripped out of it as I heard a blood-curdling scream, the scream I would remember my whole life. The man quickly ran away as fast as he could, and I fell back on my bed, opening my door and running as fast as I could upstairs to my parents' bedroom to tell them the horror story I just lived. They woke up fast and called the cops, reassuring me that I was safe in everything, caring for my horrible wound from the man's grip on my arm. They arrived at the house and I told them what happened. I was still under adrenaline, my words not sounding very clear, with the man's blood that was on the knife. They managed to get his name and where he lived. They followed up on us and told us that he got arrested for attempted kidnapping and that he already got charged with many other crimes before. I'm still traumatized to this day. So, I normally try to avoid questioning stories because you never really know. But in situations like this, I do have some questions. The ending feels very convenient, almost fairy tale-esque if I'm going to be honest. It feels like too much of a coincidence that they would have this suspected kidnapper's blood on file, that they would be able to pick it up with no contamination, especially when it was a knife covered in old food, and be able to get a positive ID match. I usually try to let those of you in the comments be the deciding factor if a story's fake or not, and just read them and enjoy them, but I'm not 19 anymore, gang. I don't know. I'll have to ask you guys what you feel, if I should call a story out, if I feel it's fake or not, but genuinely, I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys. If you guys want to be the deciding factor and I should just give my basic, non-accusatory opinions, or if I should be a bit more harsh and critical of them. Genuinely. Let me know in the comments. In my opinion, I think that half of this story is probably true. I think this person lives in a basement-style room. They heard something at their window, opened their door, and their cat wasn't there, expecting to be their cat. Probably something creepy happened, maybe it was someone trespassing, and it led to the romanticization or exaggeration of events to fit on this subreddit, feeling like they didn't quite meet the criteria initially and adding their own modifications, but that's my opinion. I'd be curious to hear yours. I'm going to try not to do this very often, but let me know what you all think. Hygh 72-1. There's a man at the end of the street. He's been watching us for years. Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. This first started happening 15 years ago and would take place over the next 13 years of my life. It all started in summertime, about 4 months after we had moved to a new house in a different state. I was 9 years old at the time and I didn't really have any friends in the area. One day, I was out in the front yard helping my dad with yard work. He would mow the front and backyards, and I would either pick dandelions out of the ground or water the plants at the front of the house. Not super helpful, I know, but I was 9 and wasn't allowed to do anything with the lawnmower besides maybe pull the cord to start the mower. My dad had just finished the front yard and had moved his way to the backyard, while I stayed in the front yard to finish up. I remember seeing a package on the porch in front of our door and going up to pick it up. And that was when I turned around and saw him. A man in his late 30s, with long dark hair tied in a ponytail hanging down past his shoulders, wearing a plain white t-shirt, black pajama pants, and no socks or shoes. He was standing at the end of our street, standing with his arms crossed and staring directly at me. Now for context, my house is 4 houses down from the end of the street. At the end of my street, there is a road that forms a T-shaped intersection. On the other side of this intersection from my house, there are 3 houses, with one house lined up in the middle of my street and the other 2 houses sitting to the right of it. To the left of the house lined up with my street is an old steel treating factory that existed surrounded by houses in our neighborhood, and, at the time, was still active 24/7. This man was standing in front of his house, lined up with my street, at the top of the T-shaped intersection. He was standing right off the edge of the street and in front of what I assumed was his house, just staring at me. As soon as I saw him, I immediately froze and stared back at him, with a sudden uneasy feeling washing over me. The longer I looked at him, the more red flags I began to notice. To my 9-year-old mind, this man was dressed very strangely, and that had already been an immediate red flag. But the creepiest thing that stood out to me was his face. His face had absolutely no expression of any kind. There was just this intense and piercing stare with him looking directly at me. It felt like he was staring right through me, and for at least 2 minutes, we stared at each other, never looking away or even blinking. Eventually, the uneasy feeling built up enough for me to slowly walk myself down off the porch and over to the side of our house, never looking away from the man. When I made it out of sight, I ran to the backyard to tell my dad about what had just happened. I came up to him as he finished mowing the backyard and described what I had seen. And that was when he told me that he had seen this man the other day doing the same thing, except just staring straight down our street, arms crossed, plain white t-shirt, pajama pants, no shoes, just like when I had seen him. After that, my dad told me that he thought the man seemed off and to stay far, far away from him. Unfortunately, that would not be the last time that I saw the man at the end of our street. From that point on, I would see this man much more often. I would be riding in the car with my family or outside doing something in our yard or on our block, and I would look over and see him standing in the same spot, arms crossed, intensely staring. He wasn't there 24/7, but at least 3 days a week I would see him outside, sometimes for 5 or more hours at a time. If not staring at me, staring at someone walking their dog or a car passing by. Once I tried to figure out his schedule so I wouldn't have to be around him as much, but it felt too creepy to keep track of him because he would occasionally start scanning his head around looking for people to lock onto, which really creeped me out. Now, some of you may be thinking, he's just staring and not doing anything. That's not that bad, right? Well, sadly, I would later find out things were far worse than I had ever imagined. So fast forward about 9 years. I'm now 18 years old and looking to get a job to save up for my first car. I hadn't really been able to save any money up at that point, and my parents weren't in any position to help me with purchasing one. So I knew that I had to try to find a job that would be easy for me to get to and that would pay me enough for me to hopefully get a cheap car quickly. Lo and behold, the steel treating factory next to the creepy man's house has a now hiring sign out front, and I decided that a 2-minute walk to work had to be worth it, even if it meant walking by creepy man's house. I had seen this guy doing this routine for almost a decade at this point and figured that it wasn't going to be a problem. So I apply and end up getting the job. It was hard work, which usually consisted of heavy physical labor and keeping up a constant pace, but nothing I hadn't expected. I started off fairly slowly and ended up getting much better and able to do tasks much faster. About 3 months in, I was assigned to work on a machine that I had not previously worked on, located in the building loading dock. From the loading dock, I had a clear view of the wooden fence that separated the factory loading zone from the creepy man's house, as well as the front of his driveway where he would normally stand. I couldn't see the man standing at his post, but I was able to notice a large hole in the fence, which seemed like it had been made in some kind of accident. The fence was not broken cleanly, but there were splinters and cracks in the fence where the hole had been made. I asked a floor worker who was with me at the dock, let's call him Ronnie, if he knew anything about this, and this actually got us into a longer conversation about the creepy man. Ronnie had been with the steel treating factory for over 15 years, and had seen the man during his staring routine more than once. According to Ronnie, the hole in the fence had been made by Creepy Man, and he had told the managers of the plant that it had been an accident with his truck. But that's not all. Ronnie then went on to tell me that creepy neighbor guy actually runs a daycare out of his house, and that it was an unregistered business and has actually led to police being called on him more than once. This surprised me, as I had never seen the police over at his house before. But after Ronnie told me this, something else occurred to me. When looking at Creepy Man's house, whenever this van wasn't sitting in his driveway, you could see one of those children's mini playgrounds with a slide and toys built into it, the kind toddlers play with. This always struck me as odd, because never once in those 9 years up to that point had I ever seen anybody else come or go from his house, especially not any children. But I had never really dedicated much thought into it. After Ronnie told me this, I thought back to when I had first seen him as a 9-year-old and all the other times he had stared at me growing up, and I began to wonder if he had been secretly plotting to try to get me over to his unofficial daycare. Sadly, I couldn't really confirm what Ronnie had told me, and at this point I had been dealing with my own personal problems at home, and I just filed the story into the back of my head as something I would not at all be surprised to find out was true. I left that job not long after this, as I had saved up the money I needed for a car and was able to make my way into the career field I had been hoping to make it into. Fast forward to 3 years later into one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me and the reason for my posting this. At this point, I had moved away from home, but ended up having to move back home with my parents for reasons I'm not going to get into. I had also met my girlfriend and we would spend some nights driving over to my parents' house to watch old movies or play games in my janky basement setup. By this point, my girlfriend was aware of the creepy man but paid him as much mind as anybody else. As creepy as he wasn't breaking the law by standing there, and our lives already had too much going on for us to be focusing our time and attention on his weirdness. On this night, I was driving home with my girlfriend for a normal night of watching movies. I didn't want to block my mother's car in on our single-lane driveway, so I had recently started parking in the grass patch behind her house. Behind her house was an alley that ran past everyone's backyards. Our backyard had a wooden fence up against the alley with a separate garage building which opened up into the alley. I had started to park in the grass patch area in between the garage doors and the alley more often. And so that was the direction I had been driving home, silently hoping to myself that the creepy man wouldn't be outside on a pleasant night like this. Well, of course, I had jinxed it, and the way home that I was going ended up taking us right past him, standing and staring us down. I locked eyes with him very briefly as we drove past him, headed to the right side of the T intersection to turn into the alley to go behind my house. But here's where things got scary. For some reason, I don't know why, as we passed by the creepy man, I got a really bad feeling. A feeling very similar to the day I had first met him. A gut-wrenching, something is wrong kind of feeling. And so I decided to look in my driver's side mirror. To my horror, the creepy man had actually left his post and started walking quickly in my direction. I can honestly say that this was the first time I had ever seen the creepy man not standing completely still. And here he was, walking the same direction I had gone. As my thoughts started racing, I turned into the alleyway and then went 4 houses down, turning into the grass patch behind the garage in our backyard. I immediately told my girlfriend what I had seen and how strange it was. I did not want her to freak out, but I also didn't want her to get blindsided if something bad was about to happen. From the angle that my car was parked, I could turn around in my driver's seat and stare at the alleyway through the slits of the window fence in our backyard. I would be able to see if he was coming and if he rounded the corner. I locked my car doors, turned in my seat, and reached into my pocket to tightly grip my pocket knife. My eyes widened and my heart started beating fast as I saw him casually walking down the alley through the slits, right up to the edge of the wooden fence, and then pause. After a few moments, he turned around 180 degrees and started walking back down the alley in the direction he came from. I waited about 2 minutes before getting out of my car and slowly approaching the edge of the fence, then walking into the alley to see that he was gone. I have thought about this quite a bit since it happened 2 years ago. I don't actually know if he recognized me or the house that I had pulled into, or why he chose that night to follow me and my girlfriend and scare the hell out of us. Honestly, I don't really care. I was able to move out of that house shortly after that happened and am now living with my girlfriend, who today is my fiance. But to the man that stared at me in my entire neighborhood for over half my life, and who followed me and my girlfriend to a dark alley for God knows what reason, let's never meet again. That was a very long and suspenseful story, not gonna lie. To me, if I were to guess, I think this person probably just has a severe form of OCD or some other mental health condition. I mean, that's the only way that I could really explain them standing around for like several hours at a time, barely moving. That's just my thought, though. I don't know. Him breaking the mold and just suddenly chasing down the alleyway is definitely like that. I mean, I have no idea. I'm still really curious in the whole daycare aspect of it, because that's also a really odd insert. Like, was that just a rumor at the steel treating facility, or was there, more to it? Because it's kind of weird that in the 9 years of him living there, he never once saw a child being dropped off, but the steel workers seem to believe there is some kind of unofficial daycare being run out there. And, that also does lead to the fact of maybe he does have kind of like an Overwatchy feel and he's watching over the neighborhood in his off time when he's not watching kids. Maybe that's just, I don't know. Personally, I just love to hear some theories in the comments, because I'm kind of all over the place with how I'm feeling on this one. Cornered in Target. So when I was 16, I got my first job working at Target. Most of what I would do is walk around the store tidying up and stocking shelves. Pretty easy job. One day I was stocking food when a guy comes up to me and asks where a product was. I told him and offered to show him where it was, so I walked him over and started to leave. He was like, "Wait." Assuming he needed more help, I went back over and he immediately started grilling me with questions. "How old are you? What ethnicity are you?" "I'm Asian." He started trying to guess what country. "Where do you live? Do you always work here?" And then to my dismay, "When do you get off work today?" He had a really creepy, unsettling smile and he was vaguely cross-eyed, which, in this situation, just added to his creepy vibe. I just said I don't know when I would get off work and deflected most of his other questions and walked away. A few days later, he appeared in the store again and found me. I was scared when I saw him and he again asked when I would get off work, what was I doing after work. I again said I don't know and started to walk away again, but he followed and started telling me that I was so beautiful just like his wife. It was getting really uncomfortable, so I tried to find a coworker and talk to them to try to get him away or at least have someone else witness his weirdness. Couldn't find anyone, so I said I had to go work at the cash register instead. More people over there. That got him to go away, but not before he gave me the creepiest smile ever and said, "See you after work." I was scared at that point in case he stalked me home after work or waited in the parking lot. I didn't want to tell my manager since I had just started my job and didn't want to make a big deal. Stupid decision, but luckily nothing happened after work. The guy stopped showing up and never saw him again. Guess he wanted to scare me, but still. Creeper at Target? Let's not meet again. Family static, an addict, and meth addicts. This is a true story that took place in my hometown in Tennessee. If wanted, I have picture evidence. I'm a resident of a smallish town in Tennessee. If there is anything you can count on always being in that town is drugs, humidity, and old people. Let me give some background information. My grandmother owned a second house in the town, though she lived in a much nicer house in a town 30 minutes away. The second house in my town she would rent to family members of ours, her husband, and her daughter. We will call the family member in question Becky and use fake names for all people involved to make sure that anonymity is kept. Becky's husband sadly passed years ago, and she herself had health problems that only got worse. It truly is sad considering how amazing they are and how many lives they touch positively. Recently, Becky died and her daughter Bella was left there alone. But in the years leading up to Becky's passing, Bella had been getting interested in drugs. She even showed up to family gatherings higher than a kite, and the people she hung around weren't very competent characters, nor were they very understanding. They all did any drug they could get a hold of and wouldn't give anything to the community. After the passing of Becky, my grandmother would have to get the house ready to sell considering Bella wouldn't be able to pay rent. And even if she could, she probably wouldn't. My grandmother, mother, and aunt showed up to clean up and check out the house only to see that Bella had more than ruined anything good about the house and sold anything she didn't ruin for drugs. The house itself was in good condition, but the walls on the inside were vandalized, ripped, rotted, and smelled strongly of methamphetamine. My mother stepped out of the house when she heard a car pull up to the house. She ran out to the unkept yard to see a red sedan pull up into the gravel drive. The driver was a man with short hair and an unkempt face. She looked to the passenger side to see Bella with extremely red eyes. My aunt promptly called the police, who came and addressed the situation. They decided that Bella was in fact under the influence of pot, but the real kicker was when they found meth and multiple other hard drugs on Bella, they promptly arrested her and my family continued to inspect the house. My aunt walked into the room that was ultimately the worst looking and smelling room of the house. "How could anyone treat a house this badly?" she asked. "Well, you don't care about anything but drugs and you end up disrespecting anything that's not yours directly," my grandmother responded. After walking around and cleaning out the items left in there, including electronics, furniture, and cookware, though there wasn't much of anything considering most things in the house worth anything was sold by Bella. As they moved things out of the house, they heard a voice. "Did you say something?" my mother asked. No one responded with a yes. They shrugged it off as possibly a toy or something left in the messy house to go off, or just their imagination. Before locking up the house for the night, my grandmother heard footsteps, but it sounded like they were coming from the roof. They walked outside and looked on the top, and there was nothing. They stepped back in and heard a loud thud. "Is anyone there?" my mother asked. Silence. They promptly called the police, and when they arrived, they explained the situation. The officers went inside to inspect the house. Moments later, the police walked outside of the house with a woman who looked like either a mummy or a severe drug addict. She had been hiding in the attic, and God only knows what would have happened if the police didn't find her. Later on, I found out that the person found in the attic turned out to be a friend of Bella's. Bella is currently expecting jail time as her mugshot is in my county's most wanted list for the sheriff's office. This kind of reminds me of the episode of Breaking Bad where Walter and Jesse were cooking meth in the basement during the house tour above. I mean, I don't know why, it just kind of did. Saved by preteen vanity. In middle school, I posted my drawings to a popular online art community. Sometimes challenges went around, such as uploading a picture of yourself and then drawing yourself in different styles. Your personal style, Disney style, and so forth. Kind of a meet the artist type of thing that was certainly intended for folks older than a 12-year-old child like myself at the time. Being a naive kid, I take part. A few days later, my inbox lights up with a message. A dude I don't know is sending me compliments on my work and asking for help with his class art project. Of course, I agree. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers online, but whatever, mom. My artistic talent is finally being recognized. Naive, remember? As it turns out, the guy wants me to model with duct tape over my mouth and ropes around my body. He tells me it would be great if I had torn clothing that I could wear for the full effect. Magnanimously, he says that should I not want to tear my clothes and get in trouble, it would also be okay if I took photos of myself with duct tape over my mouth in various states of undress. My new online friend is adamant that I send the photos directly and privately to him and delete them afterward so that none of his classmates see and plagiarize him. Cool! The newly awakened 12-year-old model in me thinks, this is totally normal and appropriate. I proceed to take the pictures on my family's digital camera and upload them to the family's dinosaur desktop computer. It's only when I go to his page to send them along that I see another person's comment there. The comment is apologizing for being unable to model and asking if anyone else had agreed to help with his art project. Yet, no longer feeling special or appreciated for all my hard work, I decide not to send him the photos. In what felt like a fit of spite at the time, I also deleted the photos and blocked him so that he could no longer see all my cool art. It wasn't until years later that I remembered this exchange and thought, that dude may have been using me for nefarious purposes. To the online predator wanting photos of an almost naked, tied up preteen, let's not meet. For any of you who are under 13 and someone asks for a picture of you online, just Google Chris Hansen and send them a picture of him, and all the work will be done for you. Crazy night in apartment 81. We had many things happen in our 5 years of living here, but this one night I will never forget, and I have told this story a few times. Here we go. We were living in a bad part of town. Well, it wasn't horrible, but you always locked your car doors, car trunk, pretty much anything with a lock. This night was like any other. We were watching TV and both of us were playing on our PCs in the living room. We are huge gaming nerds and our PCs are always in the living room. At this time, our cat Bleach Spot, nicknamed because she had this one white spot on the top of her head, was sitting in the kitchen window crying, which was odd because she didn't cry very much. My husband proceeded to get up and go check things out, and we see a foot. Yes, a foot in our kitchen window. My husband opens the window and asks the guy why he is standing in our kitchen window. This guy was a Hispanic guy who apparently lived in the apartment above ours, got locked out somehow, explanation coming, and was trying to crawl up the outside of the building back into their apartment. He told this guy to get his ass down from there before he breaks his neck. The guy tells my husband okay and proceeds to climb down. He also had to climb down because my husband was hanging onto his foot as well. He was not letting that guy climb up the outside wall. Now, just think for a second. These were 2-story apartments and he was almost to the 2nd story, so I am guessing that he was already 8 feet in the air. How he thought he was going to be able to climb up there is beyond any rational thoughts I can put together. Now, while the guy was climbing back down, my husband gets on the phone and calls 911. It just didn't look right. I mean, clearly it didn't look right for him to be climbing up there. I mean, if he was locked out for a good reason, you would call the landlord or the maintenance man to come let you back in your apartment. Our landlord lived on the premise along with the maintenance man as well, so we knew that something fishy was going on here. We called 911, explained this guy was climbing up the outside of the building, trying to get into the top apartment, and they said they would send someone out. This guy comes around to the front of the apartment building, goes upstairs, and proceeds to beat on the door for about 15 minutes straight. My husband even opened the door and hollered upstairs and told him to knock it off, that it was getting very late. It was around 1 a.m. at this time. He is still beating on the door when the cop arrives to find out what is going on or arrest him, whatever they had planned to do there. The cop goes upstairs and tells him to stop beating on the door and to come downstairs so they can talk and settle things. Well, this guy didn't like the cop apparently, so somehow in the enclosed breezeway, he gets away from the cop and runs off. The next thing I know, I find out why this guy was climbing up our window and upstairs beating the door down. A lady cop came to our door and wanted to come inside to talk to us. She told us this guy was kicked out by his girlfriend, he was illegally in the US, and the reason she wasn't up there? Her and her mother both were in the hospital. He had beaten the both of them black and blue with a baseball bat. His girlfriend wanted to break up with him, and when she did, he got mad and almost beat them to death. Apparently, he did all of this before we had gotten home that evening and while we were at my husband's mother's house. So, when we got home, the commotion was already over and no one had told us anything. The female cop, who by the way was about 6'2", I would not want to mess with her, told us to make sure and lock all our windows and keep the front door locked. They were going to have a cop car with a spotlight all night checking over the apartment complex and basically in the area where these apartments were located. She said to consider this guy very dangerous and not try to apprehend him ourselves. We agree with her. She gave us her card and told us goodnight. The next day, the sweet lady who lived across the hall from us came over to let us in on some more information. Apparently, they did find the guy, but he was never caught because he got away from them again. The mother and daughter, or well, his ex-girlfriend, were stable but still in very bad shape, but they would make it. So, guy climbing up our kitchen window that weird night, let's not ever meet again. Hey, welcome to the outro. Don't forget this whole thing is basically brought to you by GamerSupps. If you like caffeine, then I can't recommend GamerSupps enough. Use code OZ at checkout to support the channel. And I do actually use this product. It's replaced all other sources of caffeine for me because I feel good. It doesn't have any of that extra stuff that a pre-workout blend might have. It's with a couple of the extra things to make it so you don't crash as hard. It's good. I like it. Personally, if you really want a good flavor, try the Soda Pressing Pear or even the Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are my personal favorites right now.